Speedrunning is when a player attempts to beat a game in the fastest time possible. So for this Castle Crasher speedrun, I'm going to play as the Industrialist since he has the best magic in the game, and the timer begins as you select your character. So upon immediately loading in, I quit to the map and reload the game, as this saves us some time during the beginning animation, meaning we can skip the whole beginning cutscene and get straight into the action. Here I'm going to pick up the pitchfork, which can be found at the back of the level, as it has a +1 to strength, which means I'll be doing more damage. And then I'll be utilising the most well-known technique in all of Castle Crashers, and that is juggling. Juggling is when you continuously attack enemies in the air, meaning you can do maximum DPS as well as avoid getting hit or knocked down. This is simply just the best melee strat in all of the game and something we'll be using the entire speedrun. But after saving this shop here, we're going to head over to the blacksmith. We need to head over here anyway to pick up the golden compass to progress the story, but we also are going to need a pet. The animal orbs in Castle Crashers all do different things, but for the sake of this speedrun, we're going to go with Snoot, who gives a +4 to our strength stat. And whilst we're here, we're going to go get a better weapon, and that is going to be the blacksmith's hammer, which gives a +3 to strength. With just these upgrades alone, that is going to be a +7 to our strength stat, meaning we're going to do a lot of damage for the early game. This is going to allow us to breeze through the enemies and come across our first boss of the run. And here I'll utilise a early game strat for defeating big enemies fast, and that is going to be the light heavy combo. This combo allows the spinning attack to be performed multiple times. However, this combo is only available before level 8, so we're going to make sure to use it as much as possible. Up further ahead is the barbarian boss, but here we got quite unlucky since the boss was doing a lot of moves which made it very difficult to hit him. So it wasn't really ideal, but after defeating him, we saved the princess and moved on to the next area. So during cutscenes of Castle Crashers, your character can't normally move, but sometimes you can actually glitch out the cutscene. So we're going to shoot an arrow right as we enter this cutscene, which will allow the giant enemy to come attack us during it, meaning the second we come out of this scene, we can start attacking straight away. It's little things like this that will shave off seconds at the end of the run. Next was the Thieves Forest, and for the Troll Mother boss fight, you pretty much just want to focus the Troll Mother herself, as once you defeat her, all of the other minions will die. And since we've been putting everything into strength, we're doing quite a lot of damage still, so it wasn't that bad. Next was the chase scene, which unfortunately there isn't a way to speed this up, so we just got to go through with it. But after that chase scene, we end up in the river, where we want to make sure that these bats do not latch onto our heads, as if that happens, it will take longer to defeat the bats and therefore delay the enemy spawns. So we're going to make sure we abuse the light heavy combo whilst we still have it, just to make sure the bats don't get close to us. So our next boss is going to be Catfish, and once again we're going to abuse the light heavy combo whilst we still have it. Normally for Catfish you would destroy the fur ball, so then you can stun the boss, letting you do more damage, but since we have a lot of strength, we're going to be damaging Catfish between these damage phases, and we almost just get a 1 phase but come up short. So once the Catfish comes up again, we can finish him off before the second damage phase. In the tall grass fields will be our next boss, which is the bear boss. Yeah. Moving on. Moving up into Pipistrello's cave, we are going to abuse the light heavy combo to quickly defeat this boss. And for the wedding wall area, we are just going to abuse the juggle combo, since there are a lot of enemies here, but if you can get them all in one juggle, you can defeat them very quickly. And we're also going to continue that throughout the wedding area until we make it to the groom boss fight. Now we just made it to the groom under 20 minutes, which is very good time. So the groom is a bit of an awkward boss for this fight, as he will sometimes retreat to his piano and do this bomb phase, which means you can't damage him. And ideally we want to keep him stun knocked so he can't get to his piano, meaning we can get him done pretty quick. And once he's off the piano, we once again abuse the light heavy combo, but unfortunately get knocked down and have to do another piano phase. So a pretty bad groom fight, but since we got here in under 20 minutes, it's not the end of the world. Next was the cabbage section of the game, where we will fight the giant troll that chased us earlier, but luckily this fight is extremely easy, as all you've really got to do is juggle the giant hitbox. But this is unfortunately where we hit level 8, which is kind of a good thing because we can increase our strength more, but at the same time we lose the light heavy combo. So thank you light heavy combo, you served us well. We then go into another cave where we come across the goddamn slime enemies. These guys are a speedrunner's nightmare. A lot of health, very hard to hit, runs away at any sign of danger, but after spending more time than I would like on these slimes, we come across across our next technique. So some enemies in the game will be heavier than others, and that means we can't do the normal juggle on them, but luckily there is a special juggle we can use for these heavy enemies dubbed the heavy juggle, and it is pretty much the same to the regular juggle, it's just different on how we begin it. So next was the Cyclops boss fight, which is a pretty easy fight, but I just threw this. So the Cyclops is very predictable and allows you to get quite a few damage phases off, but I think I was just getting a little bit too cocky during these damage phases because I did get hit quite a few times, meaning I got knocked over and lost out on some damage. So it wasn't an ideal Cyclops fight, but anyway we saved the second princess. Although I say save, but funnily enough you don't actually need to rescue them to progress to the next area. You can just leave the game. Before going into the next area, we're going to stock up on our healing potions. I'm going to make sure to buy a lot of sandwiches as well, as the next area will require them, so buying them now saves us time later. I'm also going to buy 8 bombs, but this won't be used until the very end of the run. Next is Lava World, which is one of the longest levels in all of Castle Crashers, which has some of the highest damaging enemies we've met so far and 2 different boss fights. So Lava World could easily end a speedrun. Oh yeah, you also have to fight a lot of these skeletons at once. Did I mention Lava World was hard? Yeah, it's hard. But we eventually come across the first boss of Lava World, and that is this living volcano. And to do any damage to this boss, you need to be beefy, which is what the sandwiches are for. And straight after the volcano is the dragon boss fight. Now this boss fight is a lot more simpler, as all we've really got to do is just put all of our damage onto this dragon head. And yeah, once we defeat the dragon, we get the golden wheel. Next is going to be Industrial Castle, and make sure you do have a spare sandwich, as you do need to be beefy to rip this door off. So it just so happens that Industrial Castle is also an extremely difficult part of Castle Crashers. There are enemies with the best magic in the game, there are traps that you could take a lot of damage from, as well as a beefy brute which does a lot of damage and has a lot of health. So it's fair to say that this area can also be a run killer. So throughout this entire speedrun so far, I've been prioritizing all of my stats into strength and a little bit of defense, when really at this point in the run I should have a lot more stats into magic. And that is because the Industrialist magic can absolutely melt bosses, and that's what I was meant to do here. I should have been able to melt this boss with magic, but since I wasn't putting much into magic, I did have to use melee, which is not ideal because this boss is very annoying to melee. So I did spend a lot more time on this boss than I would have liked, but eventually it did die, and that means we can grab the golden telescope. So with the 3 relics that we collected throughout this run, we can now move on to the desert area. So like Lava World, the desert area is quite a long part of the game. It isn't as hard, but the enemies are just as annoying. You have these giant desert beetles which will go underground, meaning you can't damage them, enemies that require to be heavy juggled, as well as the enemies that just throw bombs. So it can definitely slow down the pace of the run, but luckily was able to power through it without any problems. And for the 2 alien ship boss fights, it was actually extremely easy, as by using the light heavy combo, it allows us to get high into the sky, making them an easy kill. This combo is equivalent to flying, as you can hit any enemies that are in the sky. And in the alien ship there are a lot of enemies here, but they are all one shot, meaning that all I had to do was constantly juggle all of the enemies, avoiding getting hit, as this is the one problem in this area. Since there are a lot of enemies in one area, they can pretty easily knock you down. But there wasn't any issues here, so we can move on to the escape scene, which surprisingly went well. If you've seen any of my other challenge runs, you would know that I constantly struggle in this part of the game, but luckily there were no issues here. After running through the desert a little bit, we made it to the volleyball game. Now the trick to this is playing dirty, as you can actually hit the enemies on the other side, and the goal is to knock them down, so whenever you hit the volleyball over to their side, they can't save it. And with an easy 10-1 victory, I was able to level up magic to the point where it was actually becoming useful in this run. The next part of the game requires a horn to unlock the door, so we can just enter this area and then exit immediately to unlock the marsh level. And the only problem with this level are the graves, as some of the tombstones will spawn enemies if you destroy them, so when speedrunning you've really got to be careful not to destroy any of these stones, which I of course did. But up ahead we do come across 4 beefy skeletons as well as regular skeletons, but luckily these beefies can be juggled, so all you really got to do here is get your juggling on point and make sure you're not picked up and thrown too much. And if you're playing the Industrialist like me, you could just spam the OP magic. Up further ahead we do come across the Troll Mother again, and just like before we do want to focus her to reduce the amount of enemies she spawns, but unfortunately this time killing her does not kill the rest of her minions, so the faster you kill her there's less to defeat. And our next boss of the run is going to be the corn boss, which is actually one of the most annoying bosses in Castle Crashers, and especially when speedrunning. So this boss has some of the highest health out of any of the bosses in the game, as well as having moves that negate all damage, constantly popping in and out of the battlefield and knocking you down. So all of this together makes it an extremely annoying boss fight. And our OP saw magic here isn't actually that good, because anytime you damage the corn boss with it, it will just close up, making it do 0 damage. So instead, we're actually going to cheese the boss fight. If you roll into either corner whilst the boss is at the bottom of the screen, the game will make you do constant damage. It isn't guaranteed to melt the boss, as once again the corn can just close up, negating all of your damage, but it is definitely one of the better ways of defeating him. This allows us to get the horn, as mentioned earlier, that we will need for the door, meaning we can move on to the Medusa boss fight. Now at this point in the run, we have just hit over an hour, which isn't too bad. So to quickly defeat the Medusa boss fight, it's going to be a mix of our OP magic and melee. She does like to move around a lot, which gets her out of the magic's damage, but whenever we're waiting for our magic to recharge, we can just melee her. But apart from that, it's an extremely easy boss fight and pretty quick. For the full moon level, there are 3 giants we will have to kill when going up the hill. And at this point in the run, we have got quite a lot of stats into magic, so we can just magic spam them. By doing this, we're able to do consistent damage, as well as not being in range for the beefies to attack us. And once we pass the beefies, we can finally do ladder strat. So when using a ladder in Castle Crashers, it will force all of the enemies to follow you, conveniently bunching them all together, meaning we could damage pretty much all of the enemies in this area at once. This is extremely useful for this part of the game, as one, there are a lot of enemies, but also these are some of the heaviest enemies in the game and can actually not be heavy juggled, or at least I can't heavy juggle them. I couldn't do it. So by using ladder strat, I was able to bunch them all together and kill them pretty quickly. For the snow part of the map, I wanted to get all of the enemies down as quick as possible to defeat them all at once. So I first prioritized the enemies that were behind the ice barriers to knock them all down and then get one big juggle going, meaning it didn't take long until I got to the Ice King boss fight. And at this point, our magic was doing its thing. Yeah, this is why we chose Industrialist for the speedrun. But after defeating the Ice King, we once again do not rescue the princess. I'm sure she could find her own way out, and that means we can move on to the final part of the game. The first of the 4 final bosses is the painter boss fight, and we want to make sure we come into this fight with a perfect strategy to... Did I mention Industrialist is OP? So our next boss is going to be the Undead Cyclops, and once again we're going to want to be using our magic here. So our next boss is going to be the Necromancer boss fight, and this is definitely the hardest boss fight out of the final 4. That is because before we even get to fight the boss itself, we have to go through 2 waves of enemies, and these are the enemies we face throughout the entire game. The first wave isn't too bad, as there are no beefies here and most of the enemies can be juggled, but it is the second phase which is the real problem. So we're faced against 3 beefy enemies, as well as multiple enemies that throw bombs and have to be heavy juggled, making it a really awkward fight, as there isn't really one playstyle we can go with. So for this phase, I tend to go for the enemies that can be juggled first, as it's quite easy to get around the arena whilst juggling and thins the numbers a little bit, and then resort to spamming magic, which keeps the enemies away and does a fair amount of damage to the beefies. It is definitely messy, but it does get the job done, as eventually I could fight the Necromancer himself. So when it comes to magic in Castle Crashers, there are 2 kinds of enemies. There are the bigger bosses that cannot be knocked down, meaning magic spam just melts them, and then there are the smaller enemies which can be knocked down, making the large magic spam not a great option. So for these bosses, it's either better to melee them or to use your throwable magic to spam instead. It does do a lot less damage, but it's very consistent with keeping them knocked down. So all I had to do for Necromancer was spam my throwable magic, and then when waiting for it to recharge, just do some melee. Repeat this combo until the Necromancer finally dies. All we gotta do now is defeat the final boss. For the first phase with the crystals, what we want to do is get into a corner so all of the crystals are bunched together, and then spam our saw magic. Do you remember them bombs that we bought much earlier on in the run? Well, here we're going to use them for the boss's second phase. All you gotta do is spam all of the bombs the second you can damage the boss. For phase 3, we had to jump up and just spam our attack, nothing crazy here. Funnily enough, phase 4 is the same thing, jump up and spam your attack. Can you guess what we're going to do for phase 5? And for the 6th and final phase, we actually had to do something extremely difficult. We jumped up and spammed the attack. You can see now why I said Necromancer's the harder fight here, but with all 6 phases completed, the boss finally dies. The run ends the second we land on the crystal, and our final time is 1 hour, 22 minutes and 2 seconds. And that concludes the speedrun for Castle Crashers.